everybody. Donna here from the Everything Saxophone Podcast. And we have our awesome guest today is Steve Wilson. Now, Steve has been around for quite a while. He played with everybody. He's still playing with everybody. And he also has a lot of albums out too. Okay, but his most recent album called An Enduring Sonance, which is kind of a little play, maybe a cheeky little play on Jackie McLean's A Fickle Sonance, I think, maybe. We'll talk about that for sure. Okay, but he's got a new album that's going to be coming out really soon. We're going to be talking about that. I'm going to share some tracks. We're going to listen to some tracks live here. You're going to be the first ones to hear this, which is really cool because the album's coming out. Actually, the release party is at the end of April into early May. All right, so you're going to be the first ones to hear this. And at the end, we'll share where you all can buy this. All right, let me just say this now. When you support, the best way you could support these artists is going to their website or to their Bandcamp site to buy their material, because Spotify's awesome, but unfortunately the musicians get like fractions of a penny, and pennies don't even exist in the US anymore, unfortunately, but fractions of a penny. So we're going to share that information for you all at the end. So long introduction. Anyway, it's so nice to have you on the podcast, Steve.
Donna, thank you. Been looking forward to this, and real great to be doing this. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. So before we get into your background, I got to talk about that background. What an awesome background. Where are you at your office? Where is this?
No, this actually started, this backdrop here, as I forget the name of the album. It's from Johnny Hodges' album cover. I think was on Verve. But Johnny Hodges is my favorite saxophonist of all time. Among many that I love. There's so many great saxophonists. As a matter of fact, when people ask me who do I like the most, I always respond, there's not too many I don't like, because it's just so many incredible saxophone artists. But Hodges has been the one that stayed with me since my college days. And so during the COVID times when we were, everyone was on Zoom, and I thought, no one wants to see my place, what my place looks like. Like, wait a minute. So I found this, and I've been using this ever since.
It's beautiful. It's really awesome. It's stunning, actually, which is great. And thank you for sharing that too with Johnny Hodges. What was it when you first heard him, I guess? What was it that grabbed your attention, that resonated with you?
His sound, his tone is just, I think for any instrument, it's just so pure. Um, to me, it's almost like a cello or viola. It has that kind of purity,
Hmm.
and because we tend to associate the saxophone with a little bit of edginess here, a little dryness there, or everything in that spectrum. Um, but if one were looking for, if you're looking for to call it the perfect sound, and again I know that's subjective, but to me his sound is like the best sound template to work from.
Hmm.
And no matter what genre you're working from, classical, jazz, whatever, if you start there, like this is what a great saxophone sound is, and you can go from there, up, down, left, right, whatever. But it just hit me right away, and the humanity in his sound. It's a voice. He's literally like a human voice. So for me, Hodges has been uh, that model, and of course his expression, his range of expression. And we tend to associate Hodges with his beautiful ballad playing. But if you listen to stuff from the late 1920s with Duke Ellington up to the 40s, it's so much of it's virtuosic. I mean, so we don't really focus on that side of Hodges. So,
It's true.
uh, but yeah, he's just an incredible saxophonist. I got that from my years in college at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, and our director Doug Richards, he steeped us in Ellington and all of the phases of Ellington, the early Ellington to the late Ellington, and that's where I really developed my love for Johnny Hodges.
Would you say would you say that with your students, and we'll talk about like, your role right now, but would you have even your tenor students, even your Barry students, would you have everybody use Johnny Hodges as a template for everybody?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And not so much necessarily try to sound just like him,
Sure.
but to understand how do you first of all, how can you control your sound?
Mm,
How can you make it sound as pure and natural as possible? Without relying on getting into, well, I know I need this kind of mouthpiece and this sort of literature and this all that. Of course, yeah, but that serves to the sound that that you want to get. But the main thing is you have, no matter what you're doing, no matter what kind of equipment you have to control the sound and know what to do here, the embouchure, your throat, and not get too caught up in, well, I need this kind of mouthpiece for the XYZ. First of all, do you have the concept of a good sound? Do you know what a good sound is? Can you recognize it? And then can you hear the sound in your head, in your ear, before you go into equipment? Because I've heard many saxophone players over the years who play, on a horn that's not theirs or mouthpiece that's not theirs, and they sound like them. They sound like themselves. So, but for me, he's just the perfect, not the only one, but a perfect template to draw from. Just in saying, here's a pure saxophone sound.
absolutely. And I love what you just said too. And I'm friends with so many, people that, have their own equipment companies, mouthpiece companies, horn companies and stuff. And they'll, here's the thing, their job obviously is to sell, equipment, sell mouthpieces, but they always say the most important thing is that the equipment has to get out of the way so
Yeah,
that you can come out. I
that's right.
remember Darren Ron said the same thing a number of episodes ago, probably at one of the NAM shows or something like that. He said, I choose this equipment because it gets out of my way. It helps me to be
Yes.
expressive.
Yeah, your equipment should facilitate what's inside of you. That's the thing. It's this. The sound is not in the equipment. The sound is in you. So you want whatever is going to facilitate that sound to come out.
Yeah, and you know what? Let's dive into your background and we'll talk about how you developed your sound because I said this to you before we started officially recording, so to speak. But I love your sound on the soprano. I love your sound on the alto. Especially well, a lot of times with soprano, the sound can get really thin or
Hmm.
too edgy. But
Hmm.
no, I really love your sound. So let's go back to your background. When did you start getting involved with music? Because a lot of people I speak to, saxophone wasn't their first instrument.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be a drummer originally, like like most kids.
Me too.
Yeah. But upon hearing my first live concerts when I was about, let's see, 8, 9 years old,
Oh,
at the Hampton Jazz Festival in Virginia, Hampton, Virginia, where I grew up.
oh, cool.
And I got to hear, my father took me to the Jazz Festival, which was produced at that time by George Wein, who, of course, was the impresario of Newport.
Yeah.
And he started bringing the festival down to Hampton. And so early on, I got to see Cannonball Adderley,
Oh, wow.
Rahsaan Roland Kirk, Eddie Harris,
Oh,
Stanley Turrentine,
oh man.
um, and hearing some records, that my father had. And so that was really what lit the fire for me to play saxophone. And like many of us, like most of us, I started in my formal training in what is now middle school, then junior high school. And started in wind band, marching band, jazz band, which was still called stage band. And
Me too.
yeah, yeah. And the other thing that was instrumental in all of that is all of the kids in my neighborhood at that time, and I'm talking early '70s. Everyone played music. We all played music. So my first saxophone lesson actually was, I think I was maybe 10 years old before I was taking lessons. And one of my older friends who played alto, he knew I wanted to play, and so he would come, to my house and bring his horn, and he would let me blow the horn, and he'd get behind me and he would finger the notes.
Oh,
So
cool.
I got the sensation of what that was like. Oh wow, this is the best thing in the world. So when it came time for me to sign up for band, I did that immediately and started my summer lessons.
That's cool. I know, what's interesting, for me, I grew up on Long Island, so we started actually in fourth grade.
Mm.
And in third grade, there was recorder, and then the band director showed all the instruments, and I actually played trumpet. So We started at that age, but there was like one district on Long Island that started in seventh grade. The New York City schools tend to start in seventh grade.
Mm.
I when I went to school, it was junior high school, and I think in the city schools it was junior high schools. Yeah, that's right, junior high schools as well. So it wasn't yet called middle school, but
Right.
it was interesting to me because I also taught maybe a half year or so in that junior high school in Forest Hills, Queens. Actually, I was at
Wow.
JHS 189 for
Wow.
for like a semester. So I know we spoke about where we live and stuff like that, and it was really just weird to me because I thought, oh my gosh, everybody I knew started in fourth grade, but what they were telling me is that, yeah, here's the thing: when the kids start at a little bit of a later age, they pick it up quicker,
Mm.
because you have more maturity
Mm-hmm.
about you. They pick it up quicker, and you can tend to get a lot more progress quickly. I was like, oh, okay, that was really interesting.
Yeah. 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 When I was in college, we had a wing at the school called the Community School of Music. And it was great because that was like, it gave many of us our first teaching jobs when we taught private lessons.
Oh,
And it
cool.
was really cool because we taught all ages there. And so it was really interesting to work with students who were as young as, say, maybe 8. And then maybe, a college age student would come in, or a young adult or adult. And it was interesting to see the different dynamics. I found it, I didn't find any one consistency, but I did find that um, for the younger kids who came in, and to see the look on their face when they made that first sound,
Yeah.
and then when they could play a C scale, it was like, wow, to see that, to see them light up like that was pretty amazing, inspiring.
It is cool. I used to teach elementary, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Cool. All right. So, you started up in let's call it junior high school, middle school, and then what what was the moment that you said, you know what, I want to do this for a living?
Oh, it was pretty instantaneous. I mean, for me, I knew pretty much even before I started my formal studies at 12.
Wow.
That's what I wanted to do because I started seeing these festivals, and my father had some records, and I started buying records with my allowance. And so I was, bought my first Charlie Parker records, I think, when I was like 15. But I was listening to a lot of different people at that point. The Brecker brothers,
Okay.
Paul Desmond, of course, with Dave Brubeck, Cannonball, Phil Woods, um, Stanley Turrentine, I mentioned, Grover Washington, David Sanborn, Ronnie Laws, Andrew Woolfolk, who played with Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Okay.
And I didn't really start doing my deep dive into traditional, I guess what we would call what traditional straight ahead jazz, until my senior year in high school. And my teacher turned me on to super sax, the group Super Sax, which of course, had all of the Charlie Parker solos harmonized for 5 parts. And I thought, wow, that's cool. And that's when I really started getting into Charlie Parker,
Okay.
um, and then John Coltrane. So, and it kept going from there. But a big influence on my sound was when I started playing oboe my junior year in high school,
Oh.
because we needed an oboe in the symphonic wind band, and I had wanted to play soprano sax, but we didn't have a soprano saxophone, but the oboe was close to that sound, was close enough for me, so I said, yeah, I'll play it. And so I played oboe in my junior and senior year, and actually did my first year in college as an oboe major. Um,
Wow.
but that really developed my embouchure muscles and my diaphragm, needless to say, um, and it really had a big influence on my saxophone sound.
How so though? That's really interesting.
Yeah, well, just with especially with the diaphragm, because you have to really you have to focus this air to this small aperture and the double reed, and of course, it's almost the polar opposite of saxophone because we have this open mouthpiece. Now you have to focus the air and really push and control with the diaphragm. So it increased my diaphragm muscles probably like at least twofold. So when I came back to saxophone, it was like, oh wow, I've got all of this great support down here. My muscles are not really working. But also the sound concept, because the concept of oboe, again, is that purity of sound. And so I kind of transferred some of that over to playing the saxophone. And then when I started doing my classical studies in saxophone in college, also playing the Fairling 48 etudes,
Okay.
you know, it was like because those were written for oboe originally. So so I was really trying to take some of that concept of the tone and transferring that to playing alto.
And also probably soprano too, I would assume.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, yeah.
When did you start playing soprano?
I started playing soprano, I think my second year of college, when I moved to lead alto in the big band. And of course, start developing your doubling skills. I was playing just a little bit of flute at that point. Um, but I was looking so forward to playing soprano, and I was able to buy a soprano, I think an older buffet model. And my love for soprano I mean, it was instantaneous. And ironically, I felt that even from that point that the soprano was more of a natural voice for me, because I had to work so hard on alto to fight, to get control of the alto, and that's a whole other conversation we could do. But because the alto is the easiest, I call it the easiest saxophone to start on and the hardest one to master.
Mm.
Because of the range, the pitch, you have this small margin of error on the alto to sound really good or not so good. And it's something that I've continued to work on. I kind of say half jokingly, every day I take the alto out of the case and it has me in a headlock and says, okay, let's see how you're going to get out of this today. You know, so but for I don't know, maybe I don't know for what reason, but maybe because I had been enamored with Wayne Shorter at that point. Also had been hearing Sidney Bechet, and of course Johnny Hodges' soprano sound. The soprano just felt much more natural in terms of a voice, of a personal voice. The alto's been something I've had to work really hard on to find that.
Let's dive down that rabbit hole with the alto. So, what made you feel like this is awesome? What made you feel like you were in a headlock with it?
Yeah, well, the other component in this is that I was more influenced by tenor players up until I heard Hodges. I really took the dive into Hodges because I was admiring mostly tenor players at that point, and transcribing a lot of tenor players. Um, I love Coltrane. I love Sonny Stitt on tenor. Michael Brecker, of course. Hank Mobley. So I was transcribing a lot of tenor solos, and Dexter. I also love Dexter Gordon. To get the feel, the language, the sense of different sense of I should say different styles of swing feel that they all had, and even the tone. Some of the expressions. Like Dexter had a certain way of playing, long notes, a certain way of playing ballads, um, and it wasn't really until I got to Hodges, and now I had to sort of unhear this tenor sound in my head, if I could,
Oh,
to
okay.
find an alto sound, and then to develop a lead alto sound on top of that. So, I really got into Cannonball, Phil Woods, um, Charlie Parker, of course, all the great, lineage of alto players. Um, and but I still had that tenor voice in me as a soloist. I still do actually, but to develop an alto sound was a long, long, long journey. I will say this: that there is one key point that happened. I was working in a fusion band for a number of years while I was in school in Richmond. And after I finished school, and I was the only horn player. So I had a setup that was made for volume and intensity because it's with two keyboards, drums, bass, electric bass, and um, so I was playing I think at that point an 8-star Auto-Link hard rubber on alto, maybe number 3 or number 2.5 reeds, and I went to get my horn repaired by a great repairman in the Washington D.C. area at that time, Tony Valente. and he overhauled my horn. So when I went to pick up my horn, he says, "Okay, play the horn. Let's see what it sounds like." So it feels. And he looked at my embouchure. He says, "You have too much bottom lip tucked in." So he said, "Look, just have a natural lip position. Say the sound va or the word vogue, va, vogue." He said, "Say that several times. Now play." I instantly had 30% more sound, and I was like, "Oh my God, wow." And I didn't realize how much I'd been muting the sound, by muting the reed.
Yeah.
So it took me several months to incorporate that embouchure. I went back to my Fairling studies, playing the slow ones, and I changed mouthpieces. I came down in size, and I was able to better control my sound, the consistency of my sound, the intonation, the high register, and it just really changed everything for me. So that was a huge turning point for me.
That's awesome. It's very interesting what Tony said to you because a lot of people that studied with Joe Allard or people that studied with Joe Allard use the concept of the V,
Yeah,
the V setting. V.
yeah,
I tell people V.
yeah,
Um, Tim Price, we would talk about
yeah,
this all the time, right? Oh, I know. We would talk about this all the time. His students, he would say victory. How do you say
yeah,
victory?
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
cool that you said, and I wrote that down, va and vogue. So that's more. Everybody learns differently, but that whole
yeah.
natural lip position is really important. One of my friends who started me on saxophone said to think the letter F. The
Hmm.
problem, though, everybody does this differently. Some people will think F and really tuck it in, which is
Right.
what I did,
Yeah.
instead of just F. How do you naturally say F?
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and to me, what's great about that is that because we're all different physiologically, we don't all have the
Yep.
same size lips, kind of lips, whatever, but so to me, this again, it's a great starting point because now you get away from having all of this downward and upward pressure, like from being too tight in the jaw, which constricts everything here in the throat and even in the chest. It helps to open things up. Yes, you still have to support. You have to have these muscles supporting, that surrounds the mouthpiece. But this whole thing of just vice grip, sort of, and you need that flexibility. And I found that, and then after developing voicing, now it just gave me the maximum amount of freedom. I didn't have to adjust my jaw anymore to go, I didn't have to do this back and forth motion anymore,
Mm.
throughout the register for even every note. So now one of the things I talk about to students is to try to develop a consistency in your jaw position, and look in the mirror and to try to minimize the movement of your jaw back and forth. Try to use some voice and use the throat. Now, with that said, there are a lot of great players who do the back and forth movement. And look, I'm not going to argue with them
Yeah.
because if they're playing great and sound great, if it works, fantastic. I just say to students, look, the way my philosophy is, I just try to give you more tools to have in your box. And if this can work for you, now you have another way of approaching the horn, So it's not from a dogmatic approach.
Well, it's also what you're talking about is about efficiency, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because it just makes everything simple.
Yeah.
You take the less work, the more work you can take out of this, the more you can think about expression in music.
Absolutely. And again, it also goes back to, what we spoke about before in terms of equipment. If the equipment, and it's interesting what you said too, you were on an 8-star auto link. Okay, so huge tip opening, right? A
Hmm.
lot of people, and I was told this too, and I don't fault people, but this was a myth that this is a myth that still I think goes out there. Get the largest tip opening possible, get the you have to play a metal mouthpiece, and you got to play the hardest reed, and then that's how you're going to project. And so that was drilled into my head. So little old me, I'm pretty short. Little old me is playing a Dave Gardella Super King mouthpiece
Wow.
with I don't remember the tip opening. I think it was maybe a 9. It was
Ooh,
just stupid for
ouch.
me. And like these really hard Barry synthetic reeds, and I'm sitting like, this is awesome. I'm playing really high. This is great. But you know what? It sounded flat as anything, was awful. So
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
so as some of my mentors said, you control the reed. Don't let the reed control you. So I was controlled
Yeah,
for
yeah, right, right. Well, with that said, another thing that happened. I went to see Sonny Fortune play, and this is when I was still in Virginia, and this was after that I'd had that pointer from Tony. And Sonny Fortune, and for those of you who did know Sonny Fortune would play with Miles Davis and many others, but Sonny had a huge sound. I mean, he had a huge, one of the biggest alto sounds of all time. And I after the set, I asked him, I said, Mr. Fortune, what's your setup? And I'm thinking he's going to say like a number 8 or 9, whatever. He says, well, man, this is just at that time it was a 4C, like stock H cuff mouthpiece, which I had at home because I was playing an H cuff alto at the time. And for those of you who don't know, the H cuff model was designed by Herbert Cuff, and the horn was made by Kyle Ward. So these things were built like a tank. But and I had one of those, and it's basically this stock classical mouthpiece. I said, well, how are you getting all of that sound out of this mouthpiece? He says, it's about how you focus the sound. He says, it's not about how much air you put, it's how you focus the air. And that's when I became aware of like, that concept in tongue position, about forming the pressure, the airstream. I was like, wow. So that was the next step, in my sound development. And he was absolutely right because I thought, man, there's no way I can get all of that sound out of a stock H cuff mouthpiece. Are you kidding me? It's like, it's so stuffy, but, and not that I would be able to get that kind of sound, but I think I had a number 6 Meyer at the time. I was like, oh, wow. Now this is really helping me to corral the sound, corral the tone, and find that center, that chord that I've been looking for. So it's like, oh, it's not just about how hard you blow, it's about how you focus the air, So that too was a huge turning point.
That's words of wisdom right there. And what's interesting too, think about it. You played oboe. You had to focus the air, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You could not just, you could not, with the oboe, you couldn't just put a bunch of air in your cheeks and go blow. You had to, focus it through that small aperture. So the same concept to apply to the saxophone really helped a lot.
Wow, that's a cool story. That's that, and it's so funny because that's just like you said. That's like the opposite of what most people would say. Get the biggest mouthpiece, but no, he's playing on this really small tip opening. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it just shows you too. And here's the thing. Again, disclaimer. And Steve has said this before. I'm going to say it again too. Different things work for different people. Some people, some of my friends, they do play 8 star, maybe a 9, because that's what works for them. And
Yeah.
that's all cool. You don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
But if you
Exactly.
find yourself working too hard and you're not being as efficient as possible, then there's something that, there's some work that needs to be done. There's stuff that you need to look into.
I totally agree with that. The main thing is, first of all, you have to know what you're doing. You don't want to develop bad habits because bad habits are hard to unlearn.
Yeah.
So when you learn the good habits, and then you can decide, okay, which way you want to go. That fits your personal sound and your artistic voice, your own voice. But if you learn bad habits first, they're really hard to unlearn.
Yeah, I say this to my students too, where your brain's going to remember what you tell it, right or wrong. And so,
Muscle memory. Yeah,
yeah.
muscle memory.
Like for example, you work something out one day and first time you play it, you make a mistake. You ever wonder how why you keep making the same mistake over and over again? It's because you fed your brain that information,
That's
you
right.
know? So this is really interesting. And the other thing too, the point I wanted to bring out as well, we're talking a lot about tone, embouchure. It is crucial. A lot of people are like, just give me the licks, give me the notes, give me this, give me that. But if you don't sound good, no one cares what you play because they're going to be turned off.
That's right. Yeah, because the thing is, anyone can work up the facility to play 1,000 notes, but to have a consistently good sound, and the next level of that is to have a personal sound. We all have our favorite players that we emulate, which is part of the process. But ultimately, you want to have your own sound. That's your calling card. That's you. Like every great drummer has their own cymbal beat. Even every bass player has their own way of playing on the strings that that's that player because of the way they touch the strings or the kind of downbeat they might have, coming off of the strings. It's the same thing. That's your voice. It's literally your voice, and that's what you're trying to develop.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this was really cool. So now I'm going to bring it back to, you're in college, right? You're playing soprano, you're doing all these things. What who Okay, let me ask this question. Aside from Tony, because I think Tony was a huge influence on you, right? He's
Oh, yeah, that change just changed everything for me.
changed everything for you. And it's interesting because it was just, you're getting your horn repaired and, this was an almost offhanded comment, right, that he made. And, that totally changed your trajectory.
Absolutely.
Aside from Tony, who do you feel, I guess in your early stages was, the mentor that influenced you the most and why?
Well, I'd say at least from a saxophone perspective, I have to say two people. One of my high school band directors, Dan Barlowski, who's no longer with us, but he studied saxophone in college also. Where he went to East Carolina. Actually got me into band camp there one year in my junior year in high school. Um, and a gentleman that he knew was good friends with. He brought him to our hometown for a master class, and that was the amazing James Hulick, the great classical tenor saxophonist. And he demonstrated the overtone series, where he would play reveille,
Oh,
with just a closed string. He did all of that was just, just like,
voicing.
wow. This, sort of demonstrate the whole voicing thing. And it just blew our minds. Um, Actually, I have to add this in there. I was fortunate enough to go to high school with an amazing saxophonist, um, who was the saxophone professor at the University of Florida, Jonathan Helton, and he was a year or two ahead of me. But even then in high school, he had such a beautiful sound, and he went on to be one of the top classical saxophonists on the planet. But he was a great role model for me for sound. But I also have to acknowledge Doug Richards, director of jazz studies at VCU at the time when I went to school, who got me into Ellington and led me to Hodges. Um, because playing that music, and again, the different periods of Ellington, it takes a lot of discipline to play that music. When you're playing those low notes and soft, and you have to blend and develop vibrato and to play in that style. And to learn some of those solos, transcribe them, play in that style, learn that language, it was, it upped my saxophone skills significantly. So I have to give all of those guys a lot of credit.
That's awesome. And, the power of your peers as role models. I had, peers that were a year older than me, and even some that were a bunch of years older. I was lucky in that we had, they called it grade school, right? So elementary grade school, and then we had a combined junior high school. And, a lot of educators don't like that idea because they feel that, some of the kids may get bullied or whatever. But for me, though, I benefited because I got to see the 12th graders, the seniors, and hear that sound. And some of them were incredible. And then people that were a year older than me, definitely my role models for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. I think it has a certain impact when your peer, when you see excellence from your peer. Because one, now, that that's possible. Like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
If I just put in the time, and then if they're giving you help and guidance, that's icing on the cake. So it's very attainable. So I think that's super important.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And so, all right, after college, then, uh, what happened after at that point? When did you went to New York City, I think, right?
Yeah, well, I stayed in Richmond for a few years, and I started making periodic trips to New York. And I had met Kenny Garrett in the early '80s, and I took one of my trips to New York. Actually, I took a year off from college to tour with Stephanie Mills, great R&B singer.
Oh, cool.
in 1980, 81. And on that trip, I met Kenny Garrett. And at the time, Kenny was playing with the Ellington Band. And we crossed paths a few years later when he was touring with a Broadway show that was about the music of Duke Ellington. It was called Sophisticated Lady. And they called me in as one of the locals to fill out the section. And Kenny and I met, and we hung out for a week. And a couple of years later, he was in a band called Out of the Blue, OTB, a Young Lions band that was on Blue Note. And he called me and said he was leaving the band to join Miles Davis and
Okay.
asked me if I'd be interested in playing with the band. And so they agreed to have me on a gig, and they accepted me in the band. And I moved to New York a year later, and that's what got me to New York.
Cool. Was New York a culture shock for you at first?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my God, it was, I mean, just the amount of just activity. And on one hand, it was thrilling because, now I'm here to, be around all of my heroes, my musical heroes, people I've been listening to on records, and I could go see them and meet them and, meet musicians my age, older musicians, because I was 26 when I moved to New York. Um, and so it was a great time. It was exhilarating. It was scary, but it was exhilarating.
Yeah, it's definitely I think even now more so with all the electronic billboards and everything, it's just like overstimulation.
Oh
It's just
yeah,
crazy.
very much so. Yeah, but what was so cool was being able to hang out as we all do in those days, and you're hanging out at the clubs, you're getting to meet people every time. And I was very lucky because Mike Mossman, Mike,
Yeah.
great trumpeter and arranger, teaches at Queens. Mike was the trumpeter in OTB. So
Oh,
when I moved to town, he was working a Broadway show called the Starlight Express. And he called me right after I got to town, and he says, "Hey man, come down to the show. I'll introduce you to Dick Oates." I went, "Oh my God!" And he was already one of my heroes. And and he was super nice, as we know about Oates. I mean, just
yeah.
a prince. And he actually invited me to sub in Mel Lewis, what was then the Mel Lewis Orchestra at the Vanguard a week later.
Wow.
And I thought, this is crazy because, hey, I'm just a new guy in town, all of these unbelievable saxophone players in New York, and he called me? Really? And so I went there and was able to sub, and it got through it because I got my butt kicked big time.
Oh.
But I was sitting between, Joe Lovano and Ted Nash that night.
Oh, wow.
This was, August of 19, no, July of 1987. And so I got to meet, a lot of people from there on. I got to play in the American Jazz Orchestra, which was led by John Lewis. And I'm sitting beside a gentleman who would become one of my musical mentors and godfathers, Jerry Dodgen. And, Danny Bank, who played with Gil Evans, and Benny Goodman was playing baritone. And behind me was Jimmy Nepper on trombone, and Marvin Stamm in the trumpet section, and Virgil Jones and Mel Lewis on drums. So that really what started, my networking, and it just kept going from there.
Wow. It's interesting thinking back to that time in the, let's say, early 80s, going to the later 80s. And then first of all, you had Music Row. You had the West 48th Street, right
Yeah.
around
Oh
there.
boy, what
Yeah,
you
that
missed
was
that?
great. Oh my God. I know. I was just thinking, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, I was growing up and I was classically trained at that time. So I was checking out the New York Philharmonic, but I was going to, Music Row and, going to Manny's, you know, uh, all those places down there. And it's just
Yeah,
so sad that that's gone. It's
it
just,
is sad. It's and I'm glad you mentioned that because I bought my Yamaha soprano. I bought the 62R right after they came out because Ralph Bowen, the great saxophonist who was playing with also with OTB, Ralph had studied with Eugene Rousseau at Indiana. Um, and he was the first one to tell me about the 62R. And then I saw Wayne Shorter playing it because Wayne had started playing the 62 around that time. This was 86, 87, 86. So I took a trip to New York from Virginia, and I went to Music Row. I went back and forth to all the music stores. I must have tried about 15 horns that day. And I kept coming back to the 62, which I bought from Rod Baltimore's when Rod had a shop there. But I just remembered, that's going back, there was Art Shell, there was Manny's, there was Sam Ash, there was, I forget, there was so many stores on that, and you could just go back and forth all day trying horns, mouthpieces. It was like you're a kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
And then meeting all the musicians. You see the musicians come in, like, oh, there's Pharoah Sanders. Oh, there's, whoever, It was incredible, an incredible time.
It this is really funny because this is reminding me. I go to the NAMM show just every year, and you see all these great players now, right, that are there. And but I have to say though, Music Row was more. It was just more exciting when you think about it.
Yeah,
Because yeah, because it was just such an integral part of the city,
it
and
was. It
yeah,
was.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you could just go, and I would just, my first few years in New York, or first couple of years, sometimes I would just go there, just, because you were trying equipment and things, but you just like, hey, I'm just going to go on the street, I'm just going to go to 48th Street and hang out,
yeah.
and just see who I bump into while I'm trying stuff. Or it's like, oh, great, I need a new box of reeds. Great, that gives me an excuse to go to 48th Street.
That's right.
And, you just never knew who you're going to meet. So it was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Just a trip down memory lane for a second, but it really, that whole influence of Music Row, it was huge. It was huge on a lot of people.
It was, and I used to hear stories from the different people who worked in the stores about, oh yeah, yeah, so and so came in the other day. They
Right.
were doing a session around the corner, and the horn broke, and they said, hey man, my horn broke, or my mouthpiece broke. I need to read, but they come in and say, yeah, sure, here, we'll just here, take this, go finish the session. You're like, what? Or someone working Broadway who like, oh man, I'm in between shows, my horn's broken. Can you? It was like a community. It's like a culture, you're being a part of, And that was the other thing that was so great in coming to New York, was seeing that part of the culture and the community,
Yeah.
and because that informed your music, your approaches to music. You're getting tips from these players. You're getting to meet the technicians. You're getting to meet the people in stores. You're finding out what the new equipment is, or what people are working on, or who to listen to. It was fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so you were definitely in New York at like some of the best times,
Oh yeah, yeah,
for
yeah. It
sure.
was an amazing time. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So how did this let's keep going then in terms of, your history, your background, and you were playing with Out of the Blue, you played with Stephanie Mills, Out of the Blue, Mel Lewis, a whole bunch of other people. When when did you come out with your own album? When was your first album?
Yeah, that was 1991, I believe. It was released, I think recorded 1990, recorded and released in 91. It was called New York Summit on Crisscross. And ironically, the owner of the label at the time, Jerry Takens, God rest his soul. But Jerry was known for recording, coming to New York a couple of times a year, and doing a bunch of record dates. He was kind of like, his model was sort of like the Blue Note records from the 50s and 60s, just recording the great players at that time, and particularly a lot of the young up and coming players. Um, so he had seen me with Out of the Blue, and he gave me a call and says, hey man, I'd like to do a record with you, like to record. And I honestly, I didn't feel ready at that time. I really did not seek him. And I didn't feel like I wanted to record as a leader. I was like, I'm not writing a lot. And he talked me into, he said, no, man, but I like your playing, and, I'll help you put together a good band, or you choose a good band, and, we'll make a good record with you. I said, okay. So I assembled a group, which was with Carl Allen on drums, Mulgrew Miller on piano, and all of these guys graciously agreed to record with me. Great trumpet player, Tom Williams, who is no longer with us, but he's from D.C., and James Genus on bass. Because James, who many of you might know from the bassist on Saturday Night Live for the last 20-something years, He was from my hometown, so we had known each other many years.
Oh, cool.
And so that's how that first recording took place in 1990. And I ended up doing 4 records for Criss Cross between 1990 and 1994.
Now, you know what a really important point from this is that you felt you weren't ready, but you did it anyway. Can you talk a little bit about that, especially, in the sense of like what kind of tip or something can you share to the listeners here?
Yeah, well, I after Jerry had, basically what I realized that he trusted he trusted me more than I trusted myself. And he said, "Look, man, I heard you. I like what you're doing. I like the way you sound. Just surround yourself with a good band, and everything's going to be great." And essentially that's what I did. And I tried to choose, of course, and then choosing good material because I wasn't really writing a lot of music at that point. I'd written a couple of things for Out of the Blue, but I didn't really feel confident as a writer. I didn't really feel like I had anything to say as a composer. So I just tried to choose really good songs and songs that weren't, that you didn't hear all the time. I didn't want to just go in and do confirmation and, the usual suspects, as we call them.
Yeah.
I wanted to try to find good material and just something different. Um, so so I was learning to trust in myself, and also the fact that I was able to get that band together. That these guys, because Mulgrew was working with Woody Shaw, and he worked with Dexter Gordon, and he worked with Betty Carter. He was one of the guys at the time, and Carl Allen, who had been working with Freddie Hubbard. That's where I met him. I met Carl when I went to see Freddie Hubbard once, and so just the fact that these guys agreed to play with me on my record date, I was like, wait a minute, okay. So I had to kind of learn to trust in myself a little bit more and say, well, okay. Um, so, and now it's funny because I couldn't listen to that record for years because
Oh,
it's like, I can't stand to listen to myself, and I'm still very self-conscious about it. But but also it was also one of my first times of learning some of the business aspects of recording. What it is being a band leader. You don't do it to make money.
yeah.
You don't do it to get rich. You know, but also it helped me to learn to organize in terms of putting together a recording, to organize the material. How do I want to orchestrate the session? The order solos, all of that kind of thing. So it was a crucial step, it prepared me for my next steps in recording as a leader.
And it's I guess it's fair to say too that, it prepared you, jumping ahead to now, right? So, your latest album that's going to be, well, not latest, but your album that's going to be coming up very soon.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, really, it helped my studio experience, all of those things. And as far as saxophone playing, how to adjust to a studio sound, because it's not always the easiest thing to be in headphones and hey, wait a minute, what do I sound like, and so learning how to adjust your headphones, maybe have one off, or partially on, however you want to do it. So there's a lot of little things that really helped me down the road, by doing that first record.
Can we talk a little bit more about, because I think this is a really important topic, adjusting to studio sound? Because when you're
Hmm.
playing live, it's one thing, but when you're playing in the studio, sometimes there's a lot more pressure there.
Yeah, yeah. There is a lot of pressure because the other thing is you're trying to get it right. And a lot of the concentration can go on trying to make everything right, try to be sure everything's correct. Like, okay, well, we want this tune to be 6 minutes and 25 seconds, and you have 2 choruses. So within the parameters of recording, um, how do you not be preoccupied with just making everything correct and overthinking yourself, because you can do that.
Yes.
You have to remember to play music and interact with the band, and especially if you don't have a producer on the other side, someone that's guiding the session. If you're doing that yourself, that's a lot to think about. That's a lot of bandwidth. In that case, there was a producer. It was Jerry Takins, and he was in the booth, so I didn't really have to think too much about some of those other elements. But also adjusting my sound to the studio because, like, okay, is it a dry sound here? Is it a live sound? Um, what do I do to make the least amount of adjustments in terms of the reeds and all of that stuff? And oh, am I getting too preoccupied with, oh, hey, can you do more of this in the cans, more of that? How can I sound like myself acoustically as much as I can without worrying too much about the cans? Because you can get preoccupied with that too. So yeah, it's if you hadn't done it enough, you have to learn how to not have all these other things occupy that bandwidth to help you sound like you want to sound
And
and
also to
play
make
and play like you want to play.
and make music too, because that's the whole thing. What um and here's the thing also too. Playing in the studio back then is a lot different than now. I would think, right? Because, advances in equipment,
Yep.
not just saxophone equipment, but just advances in equipment, advances in
Yep.
studios, and most people will record at home. They're
Right.
I think more people now because we can, because we have this stuff available to us, but and things are more portable. People are getting smarter in terms of doing this stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
even so, even so now, like let's say someone, it doesn't matter their age because it could be someone that uh is playing at a later age and they want to just record themselves. Like what kind of advice would you have for someone to help them to adjust to a studio sound? What are some of the things that, can prep them for doing that?
Yeah. Well, I have to consider what environment is one playing in most of the time. So if one is playing in, let's say, in a home studio, most of the time, what's the sound of that studio? Is it dry, is it a dry room? Do you have a lot of carpet, a lot of curtains, whatever, or sound absorbing surfaces? Um, and then when you go to, let's say, another studio, is it going to be the opposite of what you're used to? Or vice versa. So, like in my case, what I don't like for me personally is if I'm recording and they have me in an ISO booth, and especially a smaller one, and then they put carpet in there. I have them to take the carpet out most of the time because it
Okay.
just sucks all the sound,
Yeah.
and then you end up changing things to overcompensate. You can actually overcompensate by pushing too much or changing your embouchure. So I usually have them to take the carpet out if possible, so that I have some sound like wood or maybe a concrete bouncing back, because it helps me to control the sound a little more. Um, I think the engineers tend to put it there on purpose just to have some of that sound absorption. But for me personally, if all of my sound is getting sucked out right away, I can't color the sound. I can't control it. It just goes into that sound absorbing equipment in the microphone, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I need some room acoustically to color my sound, to whatever the music calls for. So that's something to think about. um, what are you used to? And if you get in a room and all of a sudden you're like, hey, this doesn't feel comfortable, then see what you might be able to change. And most engineers I found are amenable to making those adjustments if you ask them nicely,
Okay.
and have a good rapport with the engineers because they're there to help you. You're working together. Even if you don't know all of the technical language about, types of microphones or what you need, 99% of the times, they will help you, because they're there to make the music sound good. So just learn to work with them, on that.
No,
So,
this is a great point, and you're making me think too. I'm so glad you mentioned the relationship with the engineer because
hmm
because here's the thing, they may not be a saxophone player, but
right,
they're a great engineer, right? So
right,
they don't know what you're experiencing, and what you just said before. Yeah, I don't like experiences where it's the sound's getting sucked away, and this is the important thing too that you said as well. You don't realize it, but subconsciously you're making adjustments
yep, that's
inside,
right.
outside your mouth, embouchure, voicing, because something's off, and your
Yes,
brain is trying to compensate for that, and that's why sometimes that creates more stress
it
too.
creates more stress and it affects what you play. It affects how you play.
Yeah.
Because to me, I cannot, if I don't have my sound, either because of, I don't have a great read or the acoustics, if I'm not hearing my sound as or producing my sound as I hear it in my ear, I'm not going to play what I'm hearing. It because I'm adjusting things because like, oh God, if I play that note this way, it won't sound good. Oh, that, so those things you really want to be sure that you mitigate those things right away as much as possible, so you can be free to express yourself as you want.
Yeah, and here's the benefit of today. If you are recording in your own home studio, you have the ultimate opportunity to control, you know, your sound. If
Yeah.
you're, but if you're not, you're going to somebody else's studio, I would say that if possible, try to, reach out to the engineer or reach out to the studio beforehand so that you can get a heads up as to, kind of what to expect.
Yeah, I highly advise that. I usually, try to advance, what the studio has. Most of the time now, I know who I'm working with just because I've, worked with so many engineers in the studios. I know what they have, and I know what kind of microphones I like. But this also applies to live performance.
Yeah.
I think one of the mistakes that many musicians make is, and again, you don't have to know all of the technical language about this, but going into a live situation and just expecting that the sound engineer is going to get it right without your input. No, the first thing you should do is go introduce yourself to the sound engineer, both the house engineer and the monitor stage engineer. Introduce yourself to them and say, hey, hey, this is what I like, this is what I need. What, can we work with that? And right away that changes everything. They will work with you because they know what you like, what you don't like, what you prefer. See if they have the kind of microphones you like, what you have in your monitor. Don't just go up on the stage and start playing and blowing and say, hey, it's too loud. Hey, there are too many highs. Hey, ah. I've seen that so many times and it's like, oh man, oh, here we go. You want to create a good working vibe right away because they're going to help you to get the sound you want. But if you go in there with a bad attitude, you not a good idea because guess what? At the end of the day, your sound is in their hands. So
That's exactly right. And people don't realize that too. It's like you have to make nice nice. Now, are we saying that every single sound engineer is the nicest person? No,
of
not
course not.
necessarily. And sometimes they're having a bad day too, but
Yeah.
oh
Yeah, and,
gosh,
and and certainly by the same token, they'll tell you that not every musician is the nice person,
that's
you
true.
know. But yeah, but it helps. It really just makes everything easier. Then all you have to think about is music.
Right. And let's get to music. So your latest album, right? Enduring Sonance.
Yes.
Okay. So Sonance sound, right?
Hmm.
So let's talk about this album. And you know what I want to do, and I've been doing this lately, is this. I want to pull up the first track, which is Quiet Girl. And I'm going to share the audio only.
Hmm.
Go over here and all right, cool. So I want to start this one. I took some notes before. Yeah, okay. I'm going to start this from the beginning a little bit, but then I want to get to when you come in on the soprano, because you're playing soprano on this. I want everybody to listen to his sound, but also listen to some of his ideas. And then I'm going to ask you, your thought process for this piece and your thought process as you're performing as well. So let me
Hmm.
go over here and get this right to the beginning. There we go. Very pure sound. Now that we were talking, yeah, yeah. pause this for a second and let me stop the share. And then we're going to get to the soloing part. Hold on one second. Okay, I think I stopped the share. I hope I did. All right. So actually, no, I didn't. Hold on. Let me go back to the meeting over here. And let me just ask this question too. So
Hmm.
yeah, we can hear the French horn in there, and it sonically, like with the soprano, it's just awesome. It's a really great fit. What
Yeah.
was that your intention when you were writing this?
Well, yeah, actually, it's a tune by Billy Childs.
Oh,
And
sorry.
I've been playing this tune with Billy for a number of years, playing in his quartet. And I've always, it's one of my favorite compositions, and I've always wanted to, um, I always thought, well, if I get a chance to record this on my own, I would love to do it. And now, all of those years that I played it with Billy, and I still do play with him, um, I played on soprano, but I kept hearing English horn, and I kept thinking it back to, when I played oboe and symphonic wind band in college, because I also played English horn at the time.
Oh,
And
that's
I,
good. Okay.
and I always thought, like, man, this would sound great on English horn. It's like the perfect melody for English horn. So originally, my intention was to have an English horn on this recording, not me playing it, but have someone else playing it to split the melody. But I thought, well, wait a minute. The sounds of soprano and English horn, the sonorities sort of really close together. There's a slight contrast, but not enough that, I thought, well, that I was looking for. And if I had still played double reeds well enough, I probably would have played English horn on this.
Okay.
But but I started thinking about other material on the recording, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm hearing French horn. Um, and just talking it over with Renee Rosnes, who did the arrangements, and she loved the idea. And so I said, how do you think it would sound on Quiet Girl? And she said, oh, yeah, we can write something that's really great. It's going to fit. Because it would add a slightly brassy sound, but French horn, of course, is not brassy like a trumpet.
Right.
And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a warm, just a beautiful, warm kind of sound. And of course, French horn being in woodwind quintet, so I knew this was going to work. And Kevin Newton, who plays with the Imani Winds, came in and he just nailed it, and it just was the perfect fit. So in a way, I'm kind of getting the sound that I originally heard, and I'm still using the English horn sound model in my ear. And many times when I would play this with Billy, I would purposely try to lean into that sound, because with the soprano has so many beautiful colors in it. You can get trumpet, muted trumpet, French horn, high register trombone, some viola, violin. You've got all of this beautiful color in the soprano, so I really purposely lean into that English horn sound on it.
That's cool. And yeah, I'm hearing sonically, right? So this whole thing is we've been just as a little mini recap. We've been talking about sound. When you think about it, we've been talking about all aspects of sound,
Hmm.
and so sonically, like I'm hearing all these things, and I'm also, like the way the music is moving. The interplay between the musicians, right?
Yes.
And just the yeah, just what you can imagine in your head. See, that's what's really cool when you hear a really good piece and you hear a really good performance. You start to, like a really good book, you could picture things in your
Yep.
head. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And you
That's
can feel
exactly it.
that. And that's what I was feeling from this too. And it's interesting though. Um you could have also used a flugelhorn.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd taken that into consideration, and I was just, and of course, so again, so many great players I could have gotten for that. Um, but as I kept hearing the material, because we had Kevin on one or two other tunes, and now I wish we had him on the whole record, just because he plays so beautifully.
Yeah.
Um, but I was looking for something just a little bit deeper in,
Okay.
and that sound. I thought, wow, that's the sound. I just kept hearing that sound, because one of my other bucket list projects is to record with a brass ensemble. Um,
Oh, cool.
yeah, because I've been touring. I toured in the fall with a piece that Billy Childs actually wrote for me with Symphonic Wind Band.
Oh,
He wrote
cool.
a concerto for saxophone and and symphonic wind band, and that was on my bucket list. And so we're completing that cycle sometime this spring. So the next thing I would love to record with a brass ensemble.
That's awesome. And you know what's very interesting too? You mentioned before about what people don't realize with woodwind quintets. If you haven't seen them, French horns are often in woodwind quintets. You
Yes,
know, French
yeah,
horns almost like a chameleon in a sense.
it is. Yeah, and actually, the French horn sonically is very close to the alto
Yes.
saxophone.
Yep.
If anyone listening here is, if you get to play some of Oliver Nelson's charts that are published by um, Sierra Music, on some of those parts you'll see he'll have the alto subbing for French horn parts that he's written. So if you don't have French horns in the ensemble, or he'll write the parts in for alto saxophone.
That's cool. That's really
Yeah.
cool. All right, let me see. I want to go to yeah, the spot where you're starting a solo, and I want to get some ideas in terms of, your thought process when you're soloing. Okay,
Hmm.
so hopefully this is going to pick this up. I'm going to go around, so yeah, like around 242 in this track. So again, this is the track Quiet Girl. This is the opening track for the upcoming album here. It's like an exploring, you know?
Yes.
It's like you're exploring, you're
Yes.
finding these
Exactly.
ideas. This is cool. I
Yeah.
want to back that up again. That was really cool. Oh, you took the line from the piano. I should have done
Hmm.
that before.
It's
Okay, hold on.
okay.
Yeah, listen to that, guys. Developing that. You know, what's really cool about there's a whole bunch of things that are really cool about this. The interplay between you and the piano.
Hmm.
The piano's ending the solo, you take that line and you do something else with it, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
as you're soloing and you're coming up with other ideas, I hear in the background, and hopefully y'all caught that, but the piano's also responding a little bit too, you know? I mean, this is the mark obviously of just incredible musicians. And of course, many really good musicians are going to do that, but this is the idea where improvisation is a conversation.
Yes. Yeah. It's conversation. And as I always tell my students, and I talk about this in master classes a lot, playing in any style or genre of music or any ensemble of any kind, playing is 50% listening. You have to listen because you have to hear yourself in context. Whether you're improvising or playing your part. If you're playing a part, if you're in unison, are you blending? Are you in tune? Are you blending with the other instruments? If you're playing in a voicing of a chord, can you hear the other notes in the chord? So you understand that the role that your note plays. Is it a crucial note? How does it support other notes? How does it support the structure? If you're playing a line, are you paying attention to your articulation? It's listening all of the time, you know. And in this context, yeah, because Rini and I have been playing together. We've known each other for over 35 years.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I play in her band sometimes, and so I understand her language. She knows mine. Um, but also in terms of improvisation, you know, we forget improvisation is spontaneous composition. You know, so really it's all about extending the line. It's not just about, oh, let me play the notes and the chords in the right scales. No. And in this particular recording, the whole project was built around the concept of lyricism. So, and I picked repertoire that basically had, very lyrical melodies. And in terms of the band, everyone who understood the approach that we were after to try, to really make lyricism the impetus for everything that we were going to do. So, and that's basically been an approach of mine, I guess I'd say in the last 10 years or so, is to try to approach improvisation from more of a lyrical perspective. Not just try to play the right notes or try to play the language. That's a part of it. But now what's the next step? What do you have to say? What story are you trying to tell? What do you want the listener to come away with? What stories can you find in the composition itself? What is the composer saying? So I approach my playing, whether I'm the leader or a sideman, what I think of what an actor might do. You're a character. You're playing a character. What is that character's role in the story? You know, can you find yourself in that character and then help to bring that character out?
That is really cool. I've never heard anybody say that before. That's really cool. Wow. And then when you're writing your own music, you're thinking about that story. We had
Yeah.
Seth Ebersold on a few episodes ago in his latest album, Dear Emily, and it was inspired by poetry. Okay,
Wow. Yeah.
and so it was all about his interpretation of the poetry. And that's where music becomes really powerful.
Yes.
Because you have a why.
Exactly. Exactly. And because we're communicating. Sometimes as musicians, we tend to, especially younger musicians, we tend to think, well, okay, because we've learned all of this stuff, and I know how to play over these changes, and yeah, I can just burn it, and it'll be great, and sure, but now I also tell students, okay, when I go to hear music, I'm not there to keep score, so to speak. I'm not there to say, hey, well, man, that was great that you played the flat six on the major seven. I was killer. No, can you give me a note, whatever it is, a phrase that I'm going to remember when I leave the performance, that I will remember next week, that I will remember a year from now, 2 years from now. Can you give me something that I can take with me? That's what it's about. Can you uplift me, with your sound, with your music, with your statement? Yeah, all of those things, theoretically will be what they be, but that's not what it's about. That's not the end game. How many alterations can you play over X chord? That's not the end game. It's music. And music can serve a much higher purpose. It's there to serve our humanity.
Let me ask you this then. Going with this conversation, obviously, in order to be able to tell a story, you've got to understand the guts of the story.
Absolutely.
So you do have to understand your chords. You do have to understand, the what I guess what's in the chord, the colors of the chord, the possible extensions, the things that you can do. You have to have
Mm-hmm.
that ground, that foundation first
Mm-hmm.
to be able to tell the story. But people will always probably ask you, how do I get to doing what you're doing? How do I get to that step? I know my chords. Why can't I make a melody?
Well, that's a great point, and I'm glad you said that, because I think what has happened in jazz education, and I'll say just say with the evolution of jazz education. Let's just say that, because if we go back to the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, really, and we think about American pop music was all about melody.
Yeah.
It's about melody. Whether you're in the era of the Great American Songbook, or our era of the great singer-songwriters and Motown and all those things from the 60s and 70s, it was melody driven. And jazz education, in terms of learning improv, we turn to learn everything based on chord scale relationships, but we don't get to melody. We don't get, or we get to it as an afterthought, or we get to it last. And it's in reverse. And one of the great life lessons I had, when I was working with the Smithsonian Masterworks Orchestra in the '90s, was a wonderful repertory band that's based in Washington, that performs at the Smithsonian. and we would play. It was a big band that would play the music, the big band music of the primarily of the 30s and 40s, all the different great arrangers, composers. And at one of those concerts, the great trombonist Buster Cooper, who played for many years with Duke Ellington, was in the band for a year or two. And I asked Buster once. I said, Buster, when you played with Duke, and he gave you a feature, like a solo feature, what was the experience like? Like, what did he have on the part? You know, did he have what directions did he give you? What kind of chord changes? And he said, chord changes? There were no chord changes. I was like, what? So what? He said, here's what happened. He handed out all the parts because, of course, Duke wrote every part for each specific musician.
Yeah.
If you look at those parts, it had their names on it. So here's Johnny Hodges' part, Russell Procope, whoever. He heard that player on that part. And if you had the solo, he said, so what would typically happen, he'd hand all the parts and he'd talk it down. He says, okay, and we'd play it down, letter A, letter B, letter C. Okay, letter D, Sweetie, you got it. And he said, Sweetie was whoever the featured soloist was. I said, well, how did you know what to play? He said, you had to listen for where the melody was in the arrangement. I went, oh, wow, there it is. There it is. So there was yet another affirmation, So when we think about the American Songbook, there's a reason why those songs still resonate with us. That's why they're still so great. They're so beautifully crafted. Those melodies are beautifully written. And they had lyrics,
Right.
So,
Right.
so fast forward this to jazz education. We're too preoccupied, or I should say primarily preoccupied with chords, scales, and then alterations. And then we get to, okay, what substitutions can I play? Okay, what other notes can I play? How chromatic can I play? How outside can I play? How many chords can I stack on top of this one chord? Okay, so not that isn't valuable information. It is, because like you said, these are part of the fundamentals. But what are they serving? So to me, now go in reverse. Take that and say, okay, can you pare these notes down to a melodic approach? So instead of thinking vertically, can you think horizontally? Can you now give us a line through 8 bars or through even 4 bars? Can you give us a melody, a melodic through line that we aren't thinking about? We don't care what the chord changes are. The chord changes can be a different key every bar. Can you give me a melody where I hear that melody, you make it sound so simple that I don't even realize that there's a different key in every bar, right? Think about giant steps, the melody of giant steps. When you think giant steps, changing keys 3 times in each phrase. So it's like, but the melody, there's a prime example.
Yeah.
Just those 4 notes, or just 5 notes. That's a beautiful melody. And it goes to those key changes. So that's the approach. Can you pare all of that information down? Can you reduce 37 notes down to 6 notes? Can you reduce that to, a beautiful line? And then build from that and have that be your guide.
Right. Have that be your guide. And the thing also, you're not talking about we're going to make the simplest it's not even a question of simple, really. It's not. And
No.
melody, it's interesting because this is interesting. Everybody interprets melody differently, meaning that some people melody is going to be scale like. For some people melody is going to be filled with chord tones. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
more intervals. And for
Mm-hmm.
some people it's going to be obviously a combination. I mean, most music is, right? But
Right.
it doesn't always have to be scale like, and it doesn't always have to be chord tones, but it's how we use our own language and how we
Yeah.
interpret it.
Yeah. Even if you take one of the recordings I used in my improv class at City College is Miles Davis's solo on So What?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it will defy some of the logic that we're taught about modes. That, oh, wait a minute, he's not playing the right note in the mode. Yeah, but does it sound good? So if he had played the right note, would it have sounded as good? Same thing with Sonny Stitt. You see this in Sonny Stitt's lines a lot. where he doesn't like over a half diminish. He may not play the true half diminished scale, or an extension, but if he had played that correct note, would it have sounded the same? Would it have sounded as profound? So that's where you have to decide. This is where critical thinking comes in. Am I going to play what's correct, or I'm going to be guided what makes good melodic sense? You know, yeah, it may break a rule, but if you know what the rules are, and if you know, like, if you can use your ear to guide you as opposed to your head. So, wait a minute. Yeah, I could have played that correct note, but it wouldn't. No, it just wouldn't have worked. So these are the kind of decisions you have to make as a soloist. You have to go with what your ear tells you. And again, melody has a lot to do with that.
And I think also too, absolutely ears, before the thinking. And for some of us that are where you have that training, it's like you're thinking, but wait a minute, why are they doing that note? It doesn't make sense to me. I can't wrap my
Right.
head around it. And the funny thing, I say this to my students too, it's like you're transcribing something. It's like, but wait a minute, my logically, it's supposed to be this note. Why isn't it that note? And I can't hear it because my head wants to hear the logical note uh,
Yeah.
in there. So, you know,
Right.
the theory definitely is important for sure. I know for me, like I teach my students, let's learn the foundation. Let's understand, we've got to understand our chords and our scales and whatnot. But
Absolutely.
then it's not about it's not about throwing a lick in because you're not going to understand why the lick works,
Mm-hmm.
until you have some foundation. But then we
Mm-hmm.
want to see how can we connect these chords. It's not always going to be a 3-7-7-3 thing going on there.
Right.
It's going to be other
Right.
things going on there too.
Yeah, because I think it's important as well for both students when we're learning, because we're all still learning,
Yeah.
and when we're absorbing information and processing it, and also for us as educators that we must. It's imperative that we contextualize everything that we're learning. Because if we learn it just in a vacuum and just say, oh well, here's the right chord scale and here's the right notes and here's what's applicable, okay, that's the starting point. That's the foundation. But now in the moment of making music where you have spontaneity involved and you have to make a decision in a split second, a nanosecond about makes the good melodic sense. Even if you've practiced all of this stuff and your muscle memory is there to play this certain scale correctly, but wait a minute. But if I played this other note, it just makes more sense melodically. It speaks to the story we're trying to tell. It may be an incorrect note or a note that we don't normally associate with that given scale, but it makes so much more sense to play that note in the context of what we're doing. But if we isolate it, of course it's not going to make any sense. You're going to say, no, that's a wrong note. We can't do that. Ah, well, sounded good when Sonny Stitt played it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Or even
Sounded good when Herbie
or
Hancock played it. Sounded great to me. You know.
yeah, Dexter Gordon. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, this is so
Exactly.
cool. All right, well, I want to do another track. So bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to go
Sure.
here and I think I want to go to, let's see. Mm, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Let me go with Helen's song.
Oh yeah.
So, all right. And what I want to do here, I just want to make sure that I've got the right sharing thing here. And I'm going to, let's see if I can nix this for a second. Hold on. Give me 1 second over here. And there we go. Good. Okay. I'm going to try this a little bit differently this time and make sure that I've got this right. Okay. So go here. And this is Helen's song. I wanted to start this from the beginning. And then on this one, if I remember right, you're on alto. That's right.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I want to bring this from the beginning and then your solo starts around 109 in this. So let me get this over here and just let me know that you can hear this. You can hear this, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds pensive to me, like thoughtful. That's what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Bring this over here. Now, I want to just stop this for 1 second because think about this. The whole conversation we just had, right? There's not a million notes in this. And normally you don't want a million notes in a melody to begin with. Okay, got it.
Right.
I understand that. But there's not a million notes in this, but it's singable. It's hummable.
Yes. Yes.
And it's interesting because, when I listened to this, I was saying in the middle, like I feel like pensive. I'm thinking, I'm thoughtful. I'm thinking I'm Helen. I'm thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I'm thinking, okay, so I'm going through, I don't know, X, Y, Z, whatever it is right now, and I'm thinking about all the possibilities,
Yeah. Yeah.
da, 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 da. Oh, that may work, like when it goes to that part, you know what I'm saying? And then ba da ba da ba ba dum, and then it ends on the one, so
Yes.
all those different types of things. I just wanted to kind of bring that out, here's the context right there.
Yep.
You just
That's
brought the
it.
context to what you were
That's
saying before.
There you go. That's
Cool.
it. That's it.
All right, now let's get to the the alto solo over here. Okay, right there. Ba-ba-doo-ba-dum. Yep, going the melody. And we felt that peak coming up. We felt that peak coming up. And what's interesting again, melody, bum do ba dum do ba dum do ba da, right? That's not a scale, but we can feel that. That's like a development,
Yes. Yeah.
going on over there. And you started the solo off echoing the melody just like a step up. And then there's times when you're ba da ba da ba da ba, you're going a little outside, so to speak, but it's not you're bringing in a little tension, but it's not something that is like, how do I want to word this? You're doing it in the sake of melody.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm really on this piece particularly, and again, this is Helen's song by the great George Cables, and again another one of my favorite songs for many years, and one that I've always wanted to record. I got to play this with George a few times. But he wrote this is a song he wrote for his wife a long time ago, and those of us who know George, he's such a gentle, beautiful spirit, and so even in my improvisation, I'm trying to serve that spirit, of him, the composer, and of the song. There's actually a semi-humorous story behind the composition of the song. He told me that his wife had sort of in his mind, it sort of slightly shamed him into writing the song for her. He kind of says that jokingly, but he's such a wonderful composer. But knowing his spirit, just the lightness of being, to me, the point of this is not trying to get heavy. Let's not. I don't want to say like how much stuff can I, extract from this, and I just want to make a good, beautiful statement that serves the song and the story of the tune. I'm not looking to see how much stuff I can extract harmonically. I mean, you can do that, and I think you can even go that route. But to me, if you can do that and yet still serve the composition, now that's another level of mastery. Because we can all dig into our memory bank and our bank of everything that we know of alterations and all of that, and extensions. We can dig into all of that, and yes, it'll work. But can you and does it serve the music and the setting?
I have a question for you, and this is not gonna relate to this album because you just made me think of something. A lot of people that play saxophone when they're getting older, they play in a lot of jazz bands, a lot of community jazz bands.
Hmm.
And those solos, the chord changes are not the easiest ones. There are a lot of substitutions. You have to take a simple blues, and then all of a sudden, there's like all this crazy stuff in there.
Right.
And the thing with big bands, and I'm not going to use Duke Ellington in a certain regard. I'm going to use maybe more of the modern, maybe modern big bands.
Hmm.
But it becomes for the soloist, it's like, I've got to impress everybody. I've got eight
Mm.
measures to impress everybody. And that's like this pressure that
Yeah.
they feel. So how would you I guess advise your students who may be in these types of situations where you know in some respects in some big band music they kind of want that from you, but then
Mm.
you're the type of person you want to play melodically, so there's that
Right.
disconnect. Like what would you
Yeah.
advise?
That's a great question. Well, some of the role models that I would have for that kind of soloing and that kind of mastery is Paul Desmond, Hank Mobley, um, someone else that just came through, Houston Person, like Houston Person, who's still alive and well and kicking, and you know, Houston's the kind of player he can play blues through giant steps and it sounds amazing. you know, and so if you can cue in on those kind of players and just like Hank Mobley, like his solo on "This I Dig of You," it's the perfect solo because it has the amount of burn and intensity that you want, and yet there's no wasted notes. And another one's like that. Of course, your mentor, one of your mentors, Jimmy Heath.
Oh yeah, 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 that's right.
And I'll bring this full circle for a second, and to answer your question. When I was in school at VCU, the Heath brothers came down twice to be artists in residence. They loved it so much the first time they asked to come back, and so we, as you well know, I mean, we had a ball with them. They, Jimmy was so funny and just so giving and open and said, "Well, Percy." And the first thing, now I had already been a fan of Jimmy's playing. I had been following him on those records that they did on Columbia in the '80s, that his son was producing. They had a string of records, and that helped their popularity. And what I remember when Jimmy came down and he started playing, the first thing that went through my mind, I was like, "Oh my God, he doesn't play one wrong note.
Yeah.
There's no wrong notes. It's like, and he's playing, and Jimmy's tunes. He's got some snaky stuff."
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, what? And I had to really go back and listen to him, and everything he plays is just with so much intention. It's like it's almost measured, but it's so beautifully stated, And he's one of my role models for soloing like that because there's no wasted motion, there's no wasted notes, and so when you listen to players like that, and it gives you a great model to draw from. The other thing is, especially when we get into one of these up tempo tunes or one of these tunes that they want you to burn on, well, always remember to relax. There's a way of playing with great intensity, but be relaxed. And one of my methods of doing that is how I feel time. So if you have a fast or a medium up tempo, let's say like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Most people tend to think 2 and 4. Anytime, especially with swing, we tend to think 2 and 4 anyway. 99.998% of the time for me, I always think cut time. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4,1,
Oh,
2, 1, 2,
wow.
1, 2, 1, 1, 1. I got that also from my mentor Doug Richards, but also from the old timers that I call them the old time, but from I should say the royal gentlemen and ladies that I got to work with in New York my early days. Jerry Dodgen, Buck Clayton. I got to see the first time went to the Vanguard. The band was it was Illinois Jacquette's quartet with Slam Stewart on bass, and they were. I noticed that Slam Stewart was patting his foot on 1 and 3, and I'm like, wow, that's counterintuitive to what because I'm thinking 2 and 4. What I found from that, it allows you to relax in the time, and it allows you to think big beat. So you're not just thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the faster tempo you go, the harder it is to keep that up.
Oh yeah.
It's hard. It's information overload. So you want to be able to keep the time. So, well, I can now think bigger beat. I can think phrases instead of beat to beat. I can now think measure to measure or even phrase to phrase. So that really helps you to stay relaxed, and that informs your improvisational choices. When you could, it helps just to relax. You're not just thinking about, oh, I got to connect one up to the next. I can now literally hear and see like point A to B, point A to B. Like from here to here, not just in the smaller units. Helps you to see the bigger units. So that's a huge help in doing that.
Would you, okay, that's, first of all, that is awesome. And in order to take that step back and relax, the only thing though, you do need to understand what's going on with the chord progression. You've got to understand the
Yep.
chords and stuff like that in order to
Yep.
be able to do that. But it's the timing though. It's the timing. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hmm.
That almost feels really tense.
Yep.
One, 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 one. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes total sense.
Yeah, and if you think about it this way, if you let's say you're at a really fast tempo, if we're doing Cherokee, da, 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 dee, da, da, da. Now, first of all, if you try to step on 2 and 4, after the first measure's gone, right? It's
Yep.
like
Yep.
forget it, forget it. And so now you think, okay, well, if I think quarter note, that's again, that's a lot to have that as your reference of time and time feel. Look, you already know at that tempo, you don't have to guess that. You know what that is. So where's the one? Because one is the most important beat. Everything else is in relationship to one. You know, two is in relationship to one. Four is in relationship to one. Right? So if you don't really feel where one is, so one idea, one exercise that one can practice is, and this can be done at any tempo, in any form of tune, like play a phrase for 2 measures. Is keep the form, play a phrase for 2 measures, then don't play for 2 measures. Then play for 2 measures, don't play. Now go back, do it 1 measure. Play 1 measure, or even 6 beats. Play 6 beats, rest 6 beats. Play 6 beats, rest 6 beats. Then 1 measure each one, and of course it's in 4/4 time. So now you learn to internalize the time. You learn to really feel the space in between when you're not playing, which is super important. Because the other component is in this is that, oh God, I have to play every chord change. Oh God, if it's going by, what happens if I miss a measure? Ah, you know.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to play every chord change, every measure, especially these fast tempos. First of all, as a wind player, there's no way you can do it. Now if you elevate to be at the level of Rossan Roland Kirk and you can circle and breathe like crazy,
Oh yeah.
go for it. But for most of us mere mortals, it's like, hey, I'm trying to make a statement even at this tempo, and to keep up. So the key is relaxation and being confident in the timekeeping.
That's awesome. And the interesting thing too, I was going to mention this before about Cherokee. Listen to that melody. Does that melody move all over the place? No, it's very, very simple.
Very simple. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And now, of course, yes, we do have to work up facility. You have, there's no getting around that. So I don't mean to minimize that. You have to put in the time because that's got to serve your ideas. But it's a step by step process. It is a process. Don't feel like you're overwhelmed, like, oh my God, I don't have that facility yet. Play, play what your facility, I mean, what your technique can facilitate. Then continue to work your way up. You don't have to feel like, oh my God, I can't solo because I can't play fast. No, you take what you have and learn to make music with that, and then okay, now work your way up. Keep working for it. Keep getting better. Keep putting more facility in there. But it's not an overnight process.
Oh,
It
sure.
takes time. So, but one should not feel like they don't. It's all or nothing at all. No.
And this is awesome advice, and really it is. And the thing too, even what we're just saying right now, there's no magic pill for this. And what's very interesting when you look at true masters of anything, they make it look really simple. But the way that they've made it look really simple was back when they were starting, they went through all the exercises, all the routines. They had to dig into the weeds
Yeah,
And then the more you dig into the weeds, the more gold you can find.
that's right. Yeah, exactly. And if we go back to what I call the pre-bop era, um, before bebop came in, and again, if you listen to Lester Young, particularly Lester Young, um, and you see, because Lester didn't use a lot of chromaticism. You see very thematic playing. He was a master at thematic development, and what he would do with like a major six scale, and it could be over a standard tune, a tune that was moving around, a diatonic, but 3 1 6 2 5, that kind of thing. You don't always feel like you've got to spell out every chord change, especially if a tune is diatonic. Now, can you find phrases? Can you find diatonic phrases that you can use to make good, to construct good lines and good thematic development? So, there's lessons in every era that you can draw from. You don't feel like, oh man, if I can't play bebop, I can't make a good solo. Not true.
That's awesome. That's a great example as well. Cool. All right. Well, here's what I want to do, and I do want to value your honor your time because you've been so generous with it. Let's do this. I'm going to say this. Steve, where can people find when it comes out? I know you have the album release party at the Smoke Jazz Club in New York City, April 29th through May 3rd,
Hmm.
2026. Okay, so that's going to be the album release party. But where can people find you online? Where can they buy this album when it comes out?
Yep. Well, my website is stevewilsonmusic.com, and we're constantly updating it with latest appearance dates that I doing with various other bands and leaders and also my own stuff. And as far as the record, you can go to smokesessionsrecords.com, and you can pre-order or order from there. And by the way, they have a great catalog. Just so many great musicians recording for them. Smoke Sessions Records, but it will also be on some of the usual platforms, Bandcamp, and eventually on Apple Music and whatnot. So,
Great.
but the best ways for now is to go to Smoke Sessions, order from them, and especially if you want the LPs.
Let me also ask you this too. Like on your website, you're gonna have links to smokesessions.com as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good.
and that will be up and coming. Yeah.
Are you also on, the social media like the Facebook, Instagram, YouTube,
Yep,
or such
Instagram,
things?
Steve Wilson Sax, Facebook page. So, yeah,
Great. Okay. Now this is really cool because people you've heard snippets of this, and if you're digging this, if you're loving this and you're loving the melodicism and this whole conversation, definitely check out his album for sure when it comes out. But you could pre-order it now, which would be great. The thing is that again, y'all can listen to it on Spotify, and that's all cool, but it's not going to help Steve. I'm just going to
no,
say
it
it.
doesn't. Spotify doesn't help the musicians. They really don't.
No, I mean, unless you're Taylor Swift, she has her own arrangements with all the streaming platforms. But
Yeah,
if you want to keep the music alive, that's one of the best things that you can do.
that's right. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Steve, oh my gosh, thank you not only for your time, but a lot of the insights that you shared, the tips that you shared. These were things that we talked about today that honestly I've done almost 300 episodes actually between
Wow.
this and the NAM shows, and none of this stuff was actually shared before.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's really cool. I really appreciate it. I know the listeners
Oh,
appreciate it too. Thank you so
well,
much.
thank you. Thank you very much. Really, and congratulations on the 300 plus episodes. Keep it going.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.